The crystal chandeliers of the Pierce Logistics Group gala cast golden light across tables where champagne flutes caught the glow. Leo Grayson stood in his rented Navy suit, his 7-year-old daughter Sophie clutching a worn stuffed rabbit beside him. When Brandon Cole's voice cut through the jazz music, "That's your date, Leo?" She looks painfully plain. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Sophie's face crumpled. Leo set down his glass, hand trembling, and took Natalie Pierce's hand. He smiled, barely, and spoke one sentence so calm it seemed strange. The entire ballroom fell silent, and nothing would ever be the same. 5:30 in the morning. The alarm clock rattled on the nightstand of a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood. Leo Grayson pulled back the curtain, letting pale blue dawn light spill into the modest room. In the corner sat Sophie's small desk, scattered with colored pencils, drawings, and a few worn toys. Leo moved quietly to the kitchen, brewing cheap coffee in a machine that sputtered and coughed. He cracked 2 eggs into a pan, toasted bread that was 1 day from stale, and plated breakfast with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times alone. Leo was 34 years old, a maintenance technician at one of the massive warehouses owned by Pierce Logistics Group. His work kept the gears turning. Literally, when shelves buckled under too much weight, when conveyor belts seized and screamed, when loading dock doors jammed in their tracks, people called Leo. He was calm, patient, and rarely spoke unless necessary. He had the kind of solid, compact build that came from years of manual labor, muscles earned through tightening bolts and hauling equipment, not gym memberships he couldn't afford. His neighbors knew him as the guy who fixed their leaking faucets for free, who changed light bulbs for the elderly woman downstairs, who never complained, even when the noise from the unit above kept Sophie awake at night. Sophie was 7 years old, bright and sensitive, with a talent for drawing that her teachers praised in parent notes Leo kept folded in his wallet. She loved to sketch families, houses with gardens, skies full of stars, and she always carried that stuffed rabbit, the one her mother had given her before the accident, Emily Grayson. The name still caught in Leo's throat when he thought it too directly. She had been his wife, his partner in a dream they'd built on nothing but hope and 60-hour work weeks. They'd met waiting tables at a fast food joint, 2 kids with empty pockets and full hearts. No one thought they'd last. Too poor, people said. Too young. But they had plans. A little garage someday. A sign that read Grayson Auto Care, family first. Then came the night it rained. A delivery truck from the logistics company, the one that would later become Pierce Logistics Group under new ownership, lost its brakes on a slick road. Emily died on impact. Sophie had been home with Leo, safe but soon to be motherless. In the days that followed, men in suits appeared with paperwork and tight smiles. They offered a settlement, small and neat, wrapped in language Leo didn't fully understand. Sign here, initial there. If you fight this, it'll be worse. We're being generous. Leo, drowning in hospital bills, funeral costs, and the weight of a daughter who kept asking when mommy was coming home, signed. He took the money that barely covered half the debt, and he signed away the right to ask questions. The accident report called it weather-related. No fault of the company. Case closed. But Leo never forgot the sound of squealing brakes in his nightmares. Every time it rained, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to water drum against the window. The settlement had been a lie, and he knew it. But what could a man like him do against a corporation? Now, years later, the bills kept coming. Old medical debt, credit card interest, from buying Sophie's school supplies, and medicine. When she caught the flu, the landlord had started leaving notes under the door, polite at first, then less so. If Leo missed rent again, they'd be evicted. If he lost his job, everything collapsed. Sophie's art class, the one thing that made her smile the way she used to before Emily died, cost $70 a month. $70 he sometimes didn't have. The stakes were simple and brutal. Keep your head down. Keep fixing things. Don't make waves. Because if you lose this job, you lose everything. And worse than losing a paycheck, Leo feared losing his daughter's faith in him. She needed to see her father stand tall, not broken, not begging. At work, Leo was known as the man who fixed everything. The warehouse floor respected him. When something broke at 3 in the morning, they texted Leo. When safety inspections loomed and equipment needed desperate attention, they called Leo. But the managers above, people like Brandon Cole, saw him as cheap labor, a technician who'd work overtime without complaint because he couldn't afford to say no. Brandon had a habit of assigning Leo the worst shifts, the dirtiest jobs, the ones that stretched past midnight. And when Leo asked for time off to take Sophie to a school event, Brandon's response was always the same. "You take another day off, Grayson? Don't bother coming back." Leo swallowed his pride. He showed up. He fixed things. He survived. It was a Tuesday when Sophie got sick. The school nurse called just before noon. Mild fever, nothing serious. But policy required a parent to pick her up. Leo's stomach dropped. He couldn't leave. Brandon had made that crystal clear the week before, when Leo requested a half-day for a parent-teacher conference. Leo had no family nearby, no backup. His mind raced through options that didn't exist. Finally, he made a choice that bent the rules, but didn't quite break them. He picked Sophie up, brought her back to the warehouse, and settled her in a corner of the employee cafeteria with a juice box and her coloring books. "Stay here, honey," he whispered, crouching down to meet her eyes. "I'll fix that conveyor belt and be back as soon as I can." The cafeteria at lunchtime was a chaos of neon lights, cheap coffee smells, and the clatter of trays on laminate tables. Workers lined up for food that barely qualified as nutrition, talking about overtime, bonuses, and the latest internal drama. Sophie sat quietly at a small table near the vending machines, coloring a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands. She was so focused, she didn't notice when she coughed and knocked over her milk carton. The liquid spread across the table, dripping onto the floor. A woman at the next table frowned and scooted her chair away, muttering just loud enough. "Kids shouldn't be here. It's not professional." That's when Natalie appeared. She wore a gray sweater, black jeans, and white sneakers. Her light blonde hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, glasses resting on her nose, barely any makeup. She looked like someone you'd pass in a grocery store and forget immediately. Plain. Unremarkable. Invisible. She'd been standing in line for a salad. But when she saw the little girl struggling with wet napkins, trying to clean up the spill alone, something in Natalie's chest tightened. She stepped out of line, grabbed a handful of paper towels from the dispenser, and walked over. She knelt down so she was at Sophie's eye level, her voice soft. "Are you okay? Where's your dad?" Sophie looked up, cautious at first. Strangers weren't always safe. But this woman's eyes were kind, patient. Sophie pointed vaguely toward the warehouse floor. "He's fixing machines. I'm waiting." Natalie helped clean the table, then sat down across from Sophie. "What are you drawing?" Sophie held up the picture. 3 people. One tall, one small, and one with glasses. "A family," Sophie said simply. Natalie's throat tightened. She didn't ask who the third person was supposed to be. She just smiled and said, "That's beautiful." When Leo returned 20 minutes later, his heart nearly stopped. Sophie wasn't where he'd left her. Panic flared, brief and sharp, until he spotted her at a different table, smiling and showing her drawings to a woman he didn't recognize. Relief and embarrassment flooded him in equal measure. He approached quickly, his hands still smudged with grease. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to leave her unattended. Thank you for watching her." Natalie looked up at him, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the fear, the weight of a man barely holding on. He saw someone who'd chosen kindness when no one else had. "It's no trouble," Natalie said. "She's wonderful company." Before Leo could respond, a voice cut through the cafeteria. Vanessa Miller from HR, a woman whose smile was all teeth and no warmth, walked past with a tray. She glanced at their table, at Leo standing awkwardly next to Sophie and this plain-looking woman, and laughed. "Look at you, Leo, already charming the plain girls in the cafeteria?" Her friends giggled. A few nearby tables turned to look, smirking at the joke. Natalie didn't flinch. She didn't even look at Vanessa. She simply turned back to Sophie, her voice calm and clear. "I'd rather be plain than rude." The words hung in the air. Vanessa's smile faltered. She walked away without another word, her friends suddenly quiet. Leo stared at Natalie, something like admiration sparking in his chest. This woman, whoever she was, had just defended herself and his daughter without raising her voice, without anger, just steady truth. Sophie tugged on Natalie's sleeve. "Do you want to see my other drawings?" Natalie smiled. "I'd love to." As Leo sat down, feeling out of place but somehow welcome, Natalie said something that would change everything. "If you ever need someone to watch her for a bit while you fix things, I don't mind." Leo hesitated. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know why she was being kind, but Sophie was already pulling out more drawings, chattering about her favorite colors, and for the first time in years, Leo felt a small, fragile thing bloom in his chest. Hope. Over the following weeks, Natalie began sitting with Leo and Sophie during lunch breaks whenever her schedule allowed. She brought fruit for Sophie, helped her with math homework, listened to stories about school and art class, and the stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hoppy. Sophie started calling her Miss Natalie, the name rolling off her tongue with affection. Leo found himself looking forward to those lunch hours. The way Natalie listened without judgment, the way she treated Sophie like she mattered. One afternoon, as Leo retied Sophie's shoelaces, Natalie shared a memory from her own childhood. She'd grown up poor too, she said. She knew what it felt like to stretch $1 until it screamed, to use coupons in shop clearance racks and pretend it didn't sting when other kids had things you couldn't afford. Leo started inviting her to join them after work, coffee at the cheap diner down the street, a walk through the park on Saturday morning. Sophie would run ahead, chasing pigeons, while Leo and Natalie trailed behind, talking about everything and nothing. It felt easy, natural, like something that had been missing was finally clicking into place. But not everyone saw it that way. The gossip started small. Whispers in the hallway. Texts in group chats. "Did you see Leo with that plain consultant? I thought he'd go for someone more glamorous." Photos taken from across the cafeteria, shared with laughing emojis. The rumors reached Brandon Cole, and he didn't like what he heard. In his mind, a man like Leo, a bottom-rung technician with grease under his fingernails and a kid in tow, had no business dating anyone, let alone trying to climb above his station. Brandon started assigning Leo the worst jobs. Overnight shifts that bled into dawn. Equipment failures that required weekend repairs. And when Leo showed up tired, when he moved a little slower, Brandon would lean in and say, "Don't let your love life interfere with your work, Grayson. You're replaceable." What no one knew, what Natalie had kept carefully hidden, was her true identity. Her business card read Operations Consultant. Vague and unremarkable. She never corrected assumptions. She never name-dropped her position. Because Natalie Pierce wasn't just a consultant. She was the CEO. She was the owner. After years of climbing through the logistics industry, analyzing accident reports, fixing broken systems, she'd gathered investors and purchased Pierce Logistics Group with one mission: to stop letting workers die in accidents that were labeled as weather-related or human error when they were actually corporate negligence. She'd seen hundreds of files like Emily Grayson's case, families paid off, reports scrubbed clean. She'd kept copies, waiting for the right moment to act. When she met Leo, she didn't recognize the name at first. But as weeks passed, details aligned. The timeline. The location. The circumstances of his wife's death. Natalie had a file on her computer, locked and encrypted, with Emily Grayson's accident report inside. She'd read it a dozen times, noting the inconsistencies, the signatures approving faulty trucks, the legal language designed to silence questions. And now she was sitting across from the widower, watching him smile at his daughter, unaware that the company employing him was the same one that had stolen his wife. Natalie wanted to tell him, but how? How do you tell someone that the place keeping him fed is built on the bones of the person he loved? How do you shatter what little stability he has left? So she waited. She gathered more evidence. She prepared. And she tried not to think about the way Leo looked at her, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. One evening after work, Leo drove Natalie and Sophie home. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier. Sophie, sitting in the back seat, piped up with the kind of innocent wisdom only children possess. "If you two hold hands, it'll be easier to walk in the rain." Leo and Natalie glanced at each other, both smiling despite themselves. Under the umbrella, Leo held over all three of them. His hand found Natalie's. Their fingers intertwined. It was the first time they'd acknowledged, without words, that this was something real, something that mattered. Even as the rain fell around them, even as the weight of unspoken truths pressed down, they held on. Leo's past haunted him in waves. On quiet nights when Sophie was asleep, he'd sit at the kitchen table and stare at the paracord bracelet Sophie wore. The one Emily had made, with Sophie's name woven into the weave. Emily had been so full of life. She used to joke that they'd open their garage and call it Grayson Auto Care Family First, where they'd fix cars and people would know they cared about more than just money. They'd almost saved enough for the down payment. Almost. And then the truck, with bad brakes. The rainstorm. The impact. The company lawyer who showed up at the hospital with papers and a pen, speaking in soothing tones about moving forward and closure. Leo had signed because he was drowning. Signing felt like giving up, but not signing felt like abandoning Sophie to poverty. He'd made his choice, and he'd lived with the guilt ever since. Natalie had her own scars. Years ago, she dated a man named Adrian Clark. He was polished, charismatic, the kind of man who commanded attention when he walked into a room. Natalie had thought he loved her, but one night, during a pitch to investors, when the presentation slide glitched and she stood frozen under the spotlight, Adrian walked off the stage. He left her there, alone, while the audience murmured and laughed. Afterward, he told her the truth. "I need someone who turns heads when she walks into a room. You're too plain." Those words carved into her like a blade. She swore she'd never let her value be determined by someone else's shallow eyes again. She buried herself in work. She climbed. She succeeded. And she told herself she didn't need love. Until she met a single father in a cafeteria who looked at her like she was enough. Now, as CEO, Natalie had access to everything. She pulled up the old accident files, the maintenance logs, the email chains. And there it was. Brandon Cole's name. Emails approving trucks that hadn't passed inspection because deadlines mattered more than safety. Requests to adjust the wording in accident. Reports to minimize liability. A paper trail of choices that killed people, including Emily Grayson. Natalie sat in her office late one night, staring at the screen, her hands trembling. She thought about Leo, about Sophie, about all the families who'd been handed settlements and told to be grateful. She couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. Brandon didn't know he was being watched. He didn't know the quiet woman in the gray sweater was the person who could end him. He just knew Leo was getting too comfortable, and that irritated him. So Brandon decided to remind Leo where he stood. A shelf collapsed in the warehouse one night. Boxes tumbled. Products damaged. The investigation was quick and one-sided. Brandon doctored the maintenance logs to show Leo had skipped inspections. He called Leo into a small conference room with Vanessa from HR as a witness. The report sat on the table between them, damning and false. "You've become a liability, Grayson," Brandon said, his voice smooth and cold. "Sign the resignation. Walk away. On your own terms. Or I'll make this messy." Leo's mouth went dry. He tried to explain. He'd sent emails, multiple emails, requesting replacement parts for that exact shelf. He documented everything, but Brandon shook his head, feigning confusion. If it's not in the system, it didn't happen. Leo looked at Vanessa. She wouldn't meet his eyes. He thought about Sophie, about rent, about the $70 art class, about how fast everything could fall apart. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of work, trembled as he stared at the resignation letter. He didn't sign. Not yet. But he left that room feeling like a dead man walking. Natalie saw him in the hallway afterward. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped. She reached for his arm. but he pulled away gently. "Maybe this is what I deserve," he said, his voice hollow. He walked away before she could respond. Natalie stood there, fury and heartbreak twisting in her chest. She pulled out her phone and sent a single message to her legal team. "We move now." Leo went home that night and sat in the dark. Sophie was asleep, her small body curled around Mr. Hoppy, her breath soft and even. He held the warning letter in his hands, reading it over and over, feeling like he'd failed. Again. He'd failed Emily by signing away justice. Now he was failing Sophie by not being strong enough to fight back. A noise stirred him from his thoughts. Sophie had woken up, standing in the doorway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" Leo wanted to lie. He wanted to say everything was fine, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "I'll fix it," he whispered. "I always do. Somehow." But Leo wasn't sure he believed it anymore. He started pulling away from Natalie. He stopped answering her texts. He avoided the cafeteria at lunch. In his mind, he was protecting her. If she stayed close to him, she'd get dragged down too. Better to let her go now, before she got hurt. Natalie understood, but it didn't stop the ache. She'd spent so long building walls around herself. And Leo and Sophie had slipped through the cracks. Now he was shutting her out. And she felt that old familiar loneliness creeping back. But she couldn't stop now. She wouldn't. Sophie noticed the distance too. She asked her father one morning, her voice small. "Did I do something wrong? Why don't we see Miss Natalie anymore?" Leo's heart shattered. He knelt down, cupping her face in his hands. "No, honey, you did everything right. It's the grown-ups who keep messing things up." Sophie didn't understand, but she hugged her father anyway, because that's what 7-year-olds do when they don't have the words. Behind the scenes, Natalie was working. She met with the company's legal team, the independent auditors, and the board of directors in closed-door sessions. She compiled evidence, emails, maintenance logs, accident reports spanning 5 years. She built a case not just against Brandon, but against the culture that had allowed men like him to thrive. And she prepared for the annual gala, the one night when everyone would be watching, when the spotlight would be brightest. That's where she'd strike. The invitations went out. Employees received notices that attendance was encouraged. Leo almost threw his away. He was on the edge of termination. What was the point of attending a celebration when his world was falling apart? But Sophie found the invitation on the table. She looked up at him with those wide, hopeful eyes. "Can we go, Dad? I made a drawing for Miss Natalie. I want to give it to her." Leo looked at the picture Sophie had drawn. 3 people holding hands. A sky full of stars above them. He thought about what it would mean to walk into that room, to face Brandon and all the people who'd whispered about him. But he also thought about his daughter, who still believed in goodness, who still believed her father could stand tall. He made a decision. "We'll go," he said. Just this once. The ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers. White tablecloths stretched across round tables, each set with polished silverware and folded napkins. Servers in black vests moved between guests, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A stage stood at the front of the room, draped in company banners that read Pierce Logistics Annual Excellence Gala. Brandon Cole stood near the bar, laughing with colleagues, his tailored suit catching the light. He looked like success incarnate. Leo arrived with Sophie, both of them underdressed and out of place. His rented suit felt stiff, the tie slightly frayed at the edges. Sophie wore her simple white dress, clutching the rolled-up drawing in one hand and Mr. Hoppy in the other. They found a table near the back, away from the center of attention. Natalie arrived alone. She wore a navy dress, no sequins, no plunging neckline, just clean lines and simple fabric. Her hair was pulled back. She wore her glasses. She looked exactly like she always did. Plain. And she didn't care. She spotted Leo and Sophie, and for a moment, their eyes met across the room. She smiled. Leo smiled back, tentative and sad. Sophie waved enthusiastically. The evening began with speeches. The MC praised the company's growth, the record profits, the leadership that made it all possible. Brandon was called to the stage, applauded as a rising star, someone who'd driven efficiency and maximized output. He soaked in the attention, grinning wide. When he stepped off the stage, he made a point of walking past Leo's table. He stopped, pretending to notice them for the first time, and raised his glass in a mock toast. "So, this is your date, Leo. I thought you'd aim higher after all that overtime." The words carried. People nearby turned to look. Someone snickered. Another person whispered, "Maybe plain is all he can afford." Sophie felt the shift in the air, the way adults were looking at Miss Natalie like she was something less. An older woman in a glittering gown leaned toward Sophie, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Don't you want your dad to be with a princess, sweetie? Not just a plain lady?" Sophie's small hand tightened around Natalie's. She looked up at the woman, her voice clear and fierce. "She looks like a princess to me. She sees my dad like a king." The table went silent. A few people had the decency to look ashamed. Brandon laughed loudly, breaking the tension with forced humor, trying to regain control of the moment. But Leo had had enough. He stood. His chair scraped against the floor. The room's attention shifted to him. This man in a rented suit. This single father who fixed broken machines in the basement. His hands trembled, but his voice grew steady. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of people who'd mocked him, ignored him, treated him like he was invisible. And he spoke. "When my wife died," Leo said, his voice cutting through the music and chatter, "no one from this company asked if I was okay. No one checked if my daughter had what she needed. I was told to sign papers, take the money, and move on. I've been called a loser, a poor single dad, someone not worth noticing." He paused, glancing down at Sophie, then at Natalie. "This woman you're all laughing at? She's the first person who sat with me and my daughter like we mattered. She didn't look at us like we were a burden. She listened when I had nothing impressive to say. She treated my little girl with kindness when no one else did." His voice grew stronger. "If being plain means showing up when no one else cared, if it means listening when I had nothing to offer, if it means treating my daughter like she's worth something, then I pray I never do better than her in your eyes." The laughter died. The room fell into a thick, uncomfortable silence. People stared at their plates. A few looked at Brandon, whose smile had frozen on his face. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. She refused to let fall. Sophie squeezed her hand tighter, and in that silence, something shifted. The truth had been spoken, and it couldn't be taken back. The MC, following the scripted program, moved to the next segment. And now, let's welcome the leader who transformed this company, the woman who brought vision and integrity to Pierce Logistics Group, our CEO, Miss Natalie Pierce. The room erupted in polite applause, but confusion rippled through the crowd. People turned, looking for some polished executive to emerge from backstage. Instead, Natalie stood up from Leo's table. She smoothed her plain navy dress, adjusted her glasses, and walked toward the stage. The applause faltered. Whispers exploded. "That's the CEO? The plain girl? Oh my God." Natalie climbed the steps and took the microphone. She looked out over the sea of faces, some shocked, some embarrassed, some angry. She let the silence stretch, let the weight of the revelation settle. Then she began. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said, her voice calm and clear. "This company has achieved a lot this year. Record profits, expanded contracts, growth. But I want to talk about the cost of that growth. About what happens when we prioritize deadlines over safety, when we prioritize image over integrity." She clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up with a document. An old accident report. Names redacted, but details stark. Date. Location. Cause of death. She clicked again. An email chain appeared, signatures visible at the bottom. One name stood out. Brandon Cole. "These emails," Natalie said, show a pattern of approving vehicles that hadn't passed safety inspections, of pressuring staff to alter accident reports, of prioritizing profit over human lives. She read from one email, her voice steady. Just fix the wording. Weather will take the blame. The room was silent. Brandon's face went white. People at his table inched their chairs away. Natalie clicked again. Another report. Another signature. One of those accidents, Natalie continued, her voice softening, took a woman named Emily Grayson. A wife. A mother. She died because a truck that should have been grounded was sent out to meet a deadline. She looked directly at Leo, her eyes glistening. And tonight, her widower and daughter are sitting in this room, in the company that buried the truth. The board members, who'd been briefed in the closed-door meetings, stood and approached the stage. The chairman took the microphone. Effective immediately, Brandon Cole is suspended pending a full investigation. If these findings are confirmed, termination and legal action will follow. Security moved toward Brandon, who sat frozen, his arrogance crumbling into panic. People who'd laughed with him minutes ago turned away, distancing themselves. Leo sat at his table, numb. The truth crashed over him in waves. This company, the one paying his rent, the one where he fixed machines and swallowed his pride. It was the same company that killed Emily. He felt sick, angry, betrayed. Natalie stepped off the stage and walked directly to him. She knelt beside his chair, her voice low and urgent. I knew. I've been working on this for a long time. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I wanted to be sure we could actually do something. Leo stared at her, emotions warring on his face. Part of him wanted to scream. Part of him wanted to thank her. He couldn't speak. Natalie stood and addressed the room one final time. We're establishing a fund, she said, to compensate families who were silenced, to improve safety standards, and to honor those we lost. It will be called the Emily Grayson Safety and Hope Fund. Applause, genuine this time, filled the ballroom. Workers who'd been under Brandon's thumb stood and clapped. Some approached Leo, offering apologies for their silence, for their complicity. Leo barely heard them. He stood abruptly and walked out of the ballroom, needing air, needing space. Natalie followed. She found him on a balcony overlooking the city. Rain beginning to fall again, soft and cold. Leo, she said gently. He turned, his face a storm of grief and confusion. You're the CEO, he said, his voice breaking. And you came to sit with us in the cafeteria like you were just one of us. Natalie stepped closer, rain misting her glasses. I am one of you. Without people like you, people like me have no company to run. I'm not here to be on top. I'm here to make sure no one else loses what you lost. Leo's anger cracked, revealing the pain underneath. You used your power to fix it, he said quietly. You didn't hide. You fought. Natalie nodded. And I'll keep fighting. Before either of them could say more, the balcony door burst open. Sophie ran out, her white dress fluttering, the rolled-up drawing clutched in her hand. She skidded to a stop between them, breathing hard. I drew this for us, she said, unrolling the paper. 3 figures holding hands, stars overhead. She looked up at Natalie, her young face serious and hopeful. If you don't want to be in it, I can erase you. But I don't want to. Natalie's composure broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She knelt down and pulled Sophie into a hug, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Leo watched them, his heart aching and healing at the same time. Justice wasn't just punishing the guilty. It was restoring hope to the innocent. In the weeks that followed, Brandon was formally terminated. Investigators found enough evidence to pursue legal charges. Other families came forward, emboldened by Natalie's courage. The company implemented new safety protocols, independent inspections, and a worker-led safety council. Leo was invited to join that council, his years of hands-on experience finally valued. He accepted. The settlement for Emily's death was revisited. Leo received compensation that cleared his debts and secured Sophie's future. But more than money, he received something he'd thought lost forever: his dignity, his voice. Natalie found herself spending more weekends away from the top-floor office. She joined Leo and Sophie at the park. She learned to braid Sophie's hair. She sat on the floor of their small apartment and helped with homework, laughing when Sophie insisted she was bad at fractions. She was still plain by the world's standards. She still wore simple clothes and minimal makeup. But when Leo looked at her, he saw someone radiant. And when Sophie looked at her, she saw family. One Saturday afternoon, they sat together on a bench in the park. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Sophie ran through the grass, chasing butterflies, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Leo turned to Natalie, his hand finding hers. "I spent years thinking I didn't deserve more than what life left me with," he said. "But you walked into our ordinary little world and made it feel like enough." Natalie squeezed his hand. "I was always told I was too plain to stand next to powerful men," she said softly. "Turns out, I was just meant to stand next to the right one." Sophie ran back, out of breath and grinning. She held up a new drawing, this one more detailed than before. 3 people, standing under a sky full of stars. She looked between her father and Natalie, her voice tentative but hopeful. "So, is it okay if I start calling her Mom? Even if she says she's plain?" Leo's breath caught. He looked at Natalie, who was crying again, but smiling through the tears. He nodded. Natalie pulled Sophie onto her lap, holding her close. "You can call me whatever you want," Natalie whispered. Sophie beamed. She held up the drawing one more time. "This is us," she said. "My family." The 3 of them sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, the park quiet except for the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of traffic. The drawing fluttered in Sophie's hands. Then she pressed it against her chest, holding it like the treasure it was. No one in that moment was powerful, or plain, rich, or poor. They were just 3 people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something new, something real, something worth fighting for. And as the stars began to appear overhead, one by one, they stayed together, holding on, finally home.